What's good in the whole YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Lupinranger vs. Patoranger episode 9. This episode is called In Order to Meet Again, and this episode overall was pretty good. It was actually probably one of the better episodes we've had so far. The overall Lupinranger vs. Patoranger has been a pretty good season so far. I don't want to give you guys anything as far as like saying it's an amazing season until I can really say that for sure, but I will say it's definitely a good season so far. So keep that in mind. If you're wondering what my opinion of the show is so far, I am liking it. I'm not necessarily going as far as to say it's like one of my favorite seasons or anything yet, because we're barely into it, and you really can't go off of 9 episodes to really give a full opinion on, oh, is this season amazing? You know what I mean? And also just in general, you know, the kind of setup that they've done so far doesn't necessarily give me that impression yet, but it could be really good, you know? So anyway, moving on from all that, this episode begins with us seeing that that Kichiro is walking through the town. He's just heading down a random block. It's a nice day. He's wearing a nice jacket and suit and tie and everything. And what ends up happening is that he's passed by Zamigo. Now, Zamigo, if you remember, is the villain that actually killed the Lupinranger's friends and family. And the thing is that he's seen eating ice, which is what we saw him having in the past, but this time he's just walking on a random street. And, you know, in Kichiro's case, he has no connection to this character, and he would just assume he's just a weird guy that's just for some reason eating ice, you know? So that happens, and there's really not much to say about that other than the fact that it is interesting to see Zamigo return again. So from here, what we do end up seeing is inside the cafe for the bistro for the Patorangers or whatever. No, the Lupinrangers. Why am I saying the Patorangers? I'm talking about Kichiro, and that's why. What does end up happening is that in the bistro, they're all just getting ready to start their day of work. Kagori ends up meeting them in there, surprises them as usual, and he ends up talking about how there is this woman known as Emma Goldini, and she is going to be having a jewelry exhibit. And the thing is that there's a certain item that she wears it's a special pendant that is possibly believed to be a Lupin collection item. So they're very concerned with this factor because they have to see for a fact, because if it is one, you know, obviously the ganglers are going to go after it. So what we do end up seeing is that the Lupinrangers end up heading off to go and find Emma Goldini. Eventually, as Emma Goldini is heading through a walkway or whatever, the gangler, which is called Blitz, ends up appearing, and he's in a human form, but then he transforms into his monster form and tries to attack Emma Goldini. Following this, what we do end up seeing is that the Lupinrangers end up trying to also interact with the situation. And initially, Emma doesn't have any reason to really care about the Lupinrangers either way. You know, she's not against them, she's not for them. But what does end up happening is that Blitz kind of gives up the truth of the situation regarding the Lupin collection item, which is the fact that they're after it too and they want to steal it. And the thing is that basically screws up their chances of just easily getting it from her or whatever. Like, rather than being seen as purely as heroes, they're seen now as thieves. So that's very important, of course. And what does end up happening is that eventually the Lupinrangers end up having to split up, kind of. What ends up happening is that we see Umika and Toma having to deal with the Patoranger, because the Patorangers arrive on the scene where Blitz is, and the thing is that the other Lupinrangers are there, and then in the meantime we end up seeing that Kairi ends up having to disguise himself as a police officer, because the police officer contacts the Patorangers, and then the police officer is knocked out by Blitz, and so at that point he ends up putting on the disguise of the police officer, and eventually he ends up getting Emma Goldini to a safe place where he ends up offering to pay her any sum of money necessary in order to buy the pendant off of her, because that item is very important and that's what they're looking for. What ends up happening though is that she's not into it because of the fact that she assumes that he is actually this person that works for her sister, because the thing is that her sister has been trying to stop her in her tracks because she's been running off and been leaving the family for quite some time, and the family's been after her. So that's very important to consider, of course. But of course, it's also explained that that is not the case. What we do end up finding out eventually is that they head to the cafe or whatever, the bistro actually, and while they're there, we end up seeing that the Lupinrangers that were fighting the Patorangers and also Blitz, what ends up happening is that Blitz ends up retreating, and then following that, what ends up happening is the Lupinrangers also end up retreating. So then the Power Rangers have to go back to their base, which leads to them actually deciding to create a fake exhibit with a fake pendant to lure Blitz so that he will just show up because he'll want the jewelry. He won't know that Emma Goldini, that it's not actually Emma Goldini's pendant, but instead it's a fake, but it will be a way to lure him, which is very important, of course. So that's all being planned out. In the meantime, what we also learn is about Emma Goldini's past regarding her sister, about how she grew up in this family where she loved her sister and she envied her. And the thing was is that eventually when she had the chance to show that she could be like her and, you know, show the same talents and brilliance that her sister had, she wasn't able to achieve that, and she was always seen as being this inferior person. And that really resonated with Kyrie a lot, because Kyrie has this memory that he ends up having a flashback with, where he remembers seeing his brother during a basketball game, where what ends up happening is that his brother scores the winning shot, and then what happens is that the brother's like we both won or whatever. And the thing is that Kyrie as a kid says that I want to be just like you when I'm older, and then we end up seeing that same situation, only this time Kyrie is in the position and he ends up missing the shot. And so what happens is that it's not the same feeling, and so he begins to feel inferior. So there's this kind of relation in the kind of relationships they have with their siblings. The only difference is that in her case, she still has her sibling alive and wants to get to know her and be friendly with her. Well, in Kyrie's case, his sibling's dead. You know, his sibling was destroyed. So that's a very different story. So he really insists upon her reconnecting with her sister, because he doesn't want her to miss the opportunity to form a relationship that he wasn't able to have with his brother. And of course, the hope is that in the end, the sibling will return for Kyrie, but it's still a very smart thing, and I appreciate the kind of emotional thinking that they're going through, and like the ideas that they're having here, because like something like that is really, really good. It's a powerful idea, and it's a really effective one. I think that's like a great example of something where that gets me excited. I want to see something like that where like the story is kind of pulling at your heart a little bit and making you feel something and getting excited about it. You know, this is definitely one of those episodes where I definitely felt that, and that's really a good thing to me. Like, that makes me excited and happy to see things like that happen in the future, because when you can relate in that way and feel the pain that they do, and there's another point that happens later on where you can just feel the sorrow and how much they're so upset about something that happens later on. So what does end up happening from here is that eventually we end up seeing that there's a news broadcast about the fake pendant and everything, and so what we do end up seeing is that Lupinrangers plan to go to the location and find Blitz and maybe get and see what's going on there and deal with him and maybe get the Lupin collection item. And what's also unveiled is that she actually hears everything, so she knows what's going on. She knows that they're the Phantom Thieves that are enemies, but that also leads to some pretty interesting story. So eventually, at the exhibit, we end up seeing that Blitz ends up showing up in his human form. He also is being helped by Destra. If you remember Destra, he's one of the generals, and he's very important. And in this case, what ends up happening is that Blitz has to deal with the fake one that's inside the museum, well, Kyrie is with Emma Goldini elsewhere, and what ends up happening is that they're confronted by Destra. So, as I said before, the Patorangers are in there, and so are the Lupinrangers. They're dealing with Blitz. In the meantime, Kyrie and Emma are elsewhere, and what ends up happening is that Kyrie has to transform. This also leads to Destra knowing Kyrie's identity as both the Lupin Red Ranger and also as Kyrie himself. So now he knows who's who, which is very important because for the most part he's only known them as the Lupin Rangers. He hasn't known their human personas, so that's kind of an interesting thing that will obviously lead to some interesting story overall in the end. So what we do end up seeing from here is that eventually Kyrie does manage to get them to retreat. They end up going into this closed off location where he ends up explaining that this item, if they manage to get this pendant, the monsters may do dangerous things with it, and it might be the only way for me to see my brother if I get this item. So she realized she can't just prevent him from building that relationship, and she understands why he cared so much about her reconnecting with her sister. So what does end up happening from here is that she ends up giving the pendant, and at that point Destra appears, and what happens is that Kyrie and Destra end up fighting. Emma ends up retreating elsewhere. In the meantime, Kyrie decides to use the pendant with the Versus Changer, and it transforms into the Scissors and Blade Dial Fighter, which is a very cool dial fighter because it's 1 and 2. So basically it's one dial fighter, but it splits into 2 parts, which is a very cool thing that it has. And it also, because of that, has more than one form, not just with that like base form, but also when it's used in the Lupin Kaiser. There's something very cool about it, which is that it becomes a sword and shield situation, which is very exciting. So, and if you're wondering, I am a little sick, so that's why I'm not speaking with a full voice right now. So what does end up happening from here is that Kyrie ends up using the Dial Fighter to fly around. In the meantime, Destra ends up summoning a golem, and at that point, Kyrie has to deal with it. In the meantime, the Lupin Rangers and the Patorangers that are on the ground are fighting with each other, and at one point, when the Lupin Rangers plan to get the Lupin Collection item from Blitz, what actually ends up happening is that the Patoranger end up getting Goody, and Goody ends up going into the Versus Changer, and what happens is that they use it to blow up Blitz before the Lupin Rangers can get the Lupin Collection item, which basically makes them extremely upset because, they realize they just lost a Lupin Collection item, an item that could lead to them getting their wish of bringing back those they care about most. And the thing is that it's a really awful situation. And following this, Goody is used to also form Patoranger, and when they use Patoranger completely fails against the golem, but for some reason, Kyrie, using only the Scissor and Blade Dial Fighter, manages to destroy the golem just with those 2 things alone. In other words, he doesn't even use a full-on mecha combination, you know what I mean? Like, he just uses that and he manages to destroy the golem, which pretty much means that this Dial Fighter is really powerful, and it makes the Patorangers mecha look like a nothing. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Eventually, the Lupin Rangers head back to their base, and the Power Rangers head back to theirs. What we do end up seeing is that Emma Goldini does end up calling her sister, and she does plan on reconnecting with her. So that's a good thing that we do end up seeing. We also see at the very end of the episode that apparently Kyrie learns the truth about how they lost the Lupin Collection item, and from there, he's very upset, but he is happy at least to know that they managed to get the new Dial Fighter. So that's something, of course, that's good, but in the end, Will they be able to get that back? Or will it not be a problem in the end? We have no idea, you know? It's a hard thing to say for sure. I'm definitely looking forward to knowing what that could lead to. Maybe the Lupin Collection item will take form in another Gangler, or maybe it's just completely destroyed. Don't really know. I'm definitely looking forward to knowing how that will work in the end, because, you know, the fact that we're only 9 episodes in and this happens, I'm sure that there's a reason for this, and I'm sure that there's a way that they're going to get it back. It's just a question of how. So that's definitely an important thing to keep in mind. As far as things go for the preview for the next episode, what we do end up seeing is that the Lupin Rangers will use the Scissor and Blade Dial Fighter in the next episode, both as a weapon for Kyrie. So he'll actually use like the sword and shield as a weapon, and a new form that he'll have, which is one that I'm looking forward to seeing. And it was recently like shown off in images a week or so ago, so that's really exciting to know that we're gonna get it like right now, like next week. So that's very great. It's very cool to know. Also, we'll be getting the formation for Lupin Kaiser, so that would be good as well. And also next episode we'll have Zamigo going up against the Lupin Rangers, which is very exciting. So I can't wait to see all that and more. It's going to be a very cool episode next week because of all those things actually happening. And Zamigo I'm especially excited about. I can't wait to see how that's going to work out. And the fact that they're going to end up knowing who he is finally, that's going to make things even more interesting to see, because now we're getting into some real story. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I love to know your opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.